Welcome to Green Dot Daily. I'm Maria Marino. We are live every weekday at 3 Eastern on the Action app and YouTube channel. Big show today. Some fascinating trends coming up for each of the NFL divisional games, courtesy of Evan Abrams. Plus, who Nick Martin doesn't mind betting to win the Stanley Cup, and a pick for tonight. Some college hoops picks as well from Mike Calabrese. But we start in the NBA. The Lakers had a bit of a letdown after winning the in-season tournament, going 3-10 from December 12th through January 5th with a minus 72-point differential. But they've been better recently, winning 4 of their last 6 games with a plus 3-point differential. So with that, we bring in Action Network senior writer Matt Moore. Back so soon. This Lakers team seems to be missing something, perhaps. What can they get done before the trade deadline?
Yeah, so the Lakers are always going to kind of be looking for upgrades, right? They're an opportunistic franchise with a win-now mentality, obviously built around LeBron James. They're heavily involved in the talks for DeJounte Murray. That's been the consistent reporting, is that they'll be the number one suitor kind of for DeJounte Murray at the deadline. But there are a number of teams that are kind of picking up interest in Murray as well. They are looking for a point guard first and foremost. And the other 2 names I've heard associated with them are Spencer Dinwiddie from the Brooklyn Nets, who's on an expiring contract, and Malcolm Brogdon with the Portland Trailblazers, acquired in the Dame Lillard trade. So with Brogdon potentially on the move, there's obviously a real capacity for the Lakers to bring him in. Those guys would provide a steadier hand than D'Angelo Russell. That's really the key here, is that there's a feeling that D'Angelo Russell is probably not the guy that they want to go into the playoffs with. Despite signing him to a new deal this summer, they kind of had to. And now they're trying to move off of that and get an upgrade at point guard. The other player that I've heard them associate with is Gary Trent Jr., another, guess what, clutch client in Toronto. As Toronto keeps looking to kind of reset the timeline, Trent would give them more shooting, a little bit of versatility on offense. They're going to be careful, though. The Lakers don't want just an offensive player. They do want players that can play defense. They're looking for two-way guys, and that's going to be one of the reasons why they're going to be a little bit more selective, and why Zach LaVine is probably actually not going to wind up a Los Angeles Laker.
Well, we talked about the Pascal Siakam trade yesterday. The Kings had made an offer for him, but the Pacers, of course, end up getting him. So where did the Kings pivot now?
Yeah, they're still looking for forward help. This has been the target for them really over the past year, is that they're looking for a long-term upgrade at forward. They want to take Harrison Barnes and essentially get what they consider to be an upgrade, either younger, a little bit more offense or defense, either one. They were in on the OG Anunoby talks as well. They were a big suitor for him at the deadline last year and over the summer. So the names that they've kind of seen that I've heard associated with them are Jeremy Grant with the Portland Trailblazers, if Grant is to request a trade. Now, as of now, there's been no indication that he has, and the Blazers seem intent on keeping him. But if that changes, you can bet the Kings will be at the front of that list. Bojan Bogdanovic, obviously in Detroit, another veteran name that could probably help them. They've talked about a number of options, and if the Sixers get their eyes on something where they want to make another star trade, which everyone's expecting them to continue to look for, they'll try and do so by moving Tobias Harris. And I've heard consistently the Kings being a team that would be interested in getting in on those talks as perhaps a third team to take on Tobias Harris. They're a team I know that is interested in such an option. Either way, it's going to be at that forward spot that the Kings will be looking to upgrade before the deadline.
Interesting. Well, the Kings are currently 6th in the West. Tonight, we'll host the Pacers, and one of the more intriguing games on the board. 2 years ago, Tyrese Haliburton was traded to Sacramento. Tonight, he's questionable to return. He had missed the last 5 games with a hamstring injury. Who do you like in this one?
Yeah, I'm on the Pacers plus 7.5 here. We've seen this line move considerably from opened at 9, was 8 overnight when we did buckets, where I took this as a best bet, and now it's down to 7.5. I still like it here. I can't get this to anywhere near this number based off of power rating. Now, the Kings have been good at home, but they have failed to cover in 6 of their last 8 games. So at home, Sacramento is a good squad, but the number one problem for them is defensively. This is a weird thing. The Kings are really good on defense on the road. They're 9th in defense on the road, but at home, they're bottom 10. I don't really understand how that works, but it's the second year in a row that has been the case. You know what you don't want to do? You don't want to be bad at defense when the Pacers come to town. The Pacers actually have been a better defensive team over the last month of the season than the Sacramento Kings. So this is a team that's better balanced on both sides, especially with Halliburton back. This is a great spot, I think. I'll take the Pacers plus 7.5 on the road to not allow the Kings to light the beam.
It would be awesome if Halliburton came back so soon, because I think this is around 9 days since the injury. They originally were thinking like close to a 2-week timeline. And by the way, I was just peeping the Action app and I noticed that there's way more sharp action on the Pacers tonight. So I guess that means, Matt, that you could be considered a sharp.
Woohoo!
Matt Moore, you know him from the Buckets podcast. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
To the NFL, here's how the public is betting the divisional round so far. The most popular side is Houston plus 9.5, getting 61% of bets. Then the Lions minus 6.5 with 58% of bets. Now this shifted overnight. The Bucks were the majority last night. The Packers plus 9.5 are getting 54% of bets, and the most divisive game has the Chiefs plus 2.5 getting 52% of bets. By the way, in terms of totals, Packers getting 75% of tickets on the over, which is similar to what happened last week, and the over ended up hitting in Dallas. Director of Research Evan Abrams joins me now. We're going to rip through all 4 matchups this weekend and all the relevant trends. Let's start with Texans Ravens, 4:30 Eastern Saturday. CJ Stroud, a chance to continue his epic rookie season. How significant would an upset be for him?
Yeah, people can't get enough of the Texans, Maria. Now, let's go back to the bet percentage for a second. So in the last 20 years in the playoffs, only 4 teams who were underdogs of a touchdown or more actually closed with 60% of tickets. The last was the Saints in 2014. So it's been a decade. Moving on from that for a second. So if the Texans do close between 9.5, or even more, and CJ Stroud is able to take down the Ravens, he would join Mark Sanchez as the only rookies to win a playoff game as that high of an underdog. And from Stroud's point of view, I mean, he hasn't thrown an interception since November 11th. 6 straight games. He's got 9 touchdowns. Kid couldn't be playing better. So the opportunity's there.
So impressive. And another young QB who has captured a lot of hearts is Jordan Love. Some wondering if the Packers can shock the world. So what's at stake in this one historically?
Historically, this might be the most fun we've ever had. So Brett Favre couldn't beat the Cowboys in the playoffs. He was 0-3. Now Rodgers and Love 3-0. Aaron Rodgers couldn't beat the 49ers in the playoffs, 0-4. Favre went 4-1. So now Jordan Love can basically complete history. He can also be the only quarterback, only team to beat the Cowboys and the 49ers in the same playoff campaign. I looked it up like 4 times. To me, it was almost impossible that it was true, but really fun with both of their histories. And I'll give you one stat, and this stat's a little bit of a scary one. So teams to win as underdogs in the wildcard round are actually 1-19 straight up in the divisional round since 2011. The only win were the Titans plus 10 over the Ravens in 2020. So history not on Lamar's side in that one.
Well, sticking with that matchup for a second, Packers Matt LaFleur obviously knows Kyle Shanahan very well, but has a tall task because Shanahan has been so good in his playoff career.
Yeah, not only that. So the Niners had a streak of, if I remember, 9, 10, 11 games of winning at home and covering this season. So they've been on a run at home. And in the playoffs historically, Shanahan 4-0 straight up and against the spread, both as a favorite and at home. Since 1990, he is the only head coach undefeated with that many wins in both spots. And speaking of undefeated, I'll give you one more fun one. Baker Mayfield, 3-0 against the spread in the playoffs in his career. He is just one of 2 quarterbacks, 3-0 ATS or better in their playoffs since 1980. Every other quarterback has at least 1 loss. The other one, so it's Jeff Hostetler, who finished 5-0 against the spread, retired, went off, drank some drinks, looking good. But the thing that's fun with this Bucks team, they went 0-4 ATS as underdogs last year. So complete turnaround.
Yeah, elaborate on that a little bit more because I know
Sure.
they've been very good against the spread, at least recently.
Yeah, so Baker's covered 4 in a row as a dog, and he's 7-1 ATS in his last 8. I mean, this year they're 9-3 ATS as underdogs, including 6-6 straight up. They've really come out of nowhere, very similar to the other Bay, right? Green Bay and Tampa Bay having very nice late surges to the season.
So, as you pointed out, the Bucks, it feels like they can make some noise against the Lions, but I do want to touch on the Lions and just how remarkable this turnaround has been for an otherwise maligned franchise.
Yeah, between the Browns and the Lions, it's been a really, really fun late season in terms of things that haven't happened since like the 50s and 60s. So this is just the second time in Lions franchise history that they've been favorites in the playoffs in consecutive games. It last happened for them in 1952. The Rams and then the Browns. They played the Browns actually in Cleveland in the championship game and were favored. The number one song in America that time, now this is a Matt Mitchell find. He did this earlier, so this isn't from me, is I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus, December 1952. Feels near impossible, but this is a Restore the Roar, bring back Detroit.
That's incredible. 1952. It has been a while. Okay. One more game to talk about, and it's a good one. This divisional weekend will appropriately culminate with Chiefs, Bills, Sunday night. What's noteworthy heading into this rivalry game?
Yeah, we would almost say this is scripted to make this matchup end the weekend to go to the championship game, but we're not going to say that. But to go into detail, everyone's going to say the stat. It's worth repeating. Mahomes, 7-3 straight up, 8-1-1 against the spread as an underdog in his career. Now, everywhere you're going to go, everyone's going to say, this is Patrick Mahomes' first game as an underdog as a road team in the playoffs. Well, he actually played the Super Bowl in Tampa Bay facing the Bucks. They lost that game 31-9. So maybe his second road game or second road environment. It's also worth noting he hasn't played in Buffalo since his first game there like 5 years ago, and there were no fans. So this is going to be his first experience in Buffalo with the Mafia, which should be fun. And one Josh Allen stat, which I found fascinating. So last week against the Steelers, they played near perfect football, no turnovers. And for the Bills and Josh Allen, that's a little uncommon. So Josh Allen is 13, 18, and 2 against the spread after the Bills don't turn over the ball in their previous game. That includes a 4-10-1 ATS mark in the past 3 seasons. That is the worst of 80 quarterbacks in the NFL. So Josh Allen usually ends up turning it over after not. So we're going to see if he can keep the streak going and stay clean against Kansas City, Maria.
A little scary for Josh Allen, but also a little scary for Mahomes, who has not experienced this road environment in Buffalo with fans. This is going to be so fun. Evan Abrams, enjoyed this a lot. Thank you so much for joining Green Dot Daily.
100%. Enjoy the weekend, Maria.
To the NHL, going into this season, the Oilers were one of the favorites to win the Stanley Cup at plus 1,000. A couple months into the season, their odds had moved up to plus 1,800. Now, after some stabilization and an 11-game win streak, they're back at plus 1,000. And Nick Martin is back on Green Dot Daily, our hockey expert. Good to see you. So, the shortest odds to win the cup currently belong to the Avalanche at plus 750. Oilers and Hurricanes are tied at that plus 1,000. Then a handful of teams, including the Bruins, are at plus 1,100. Are you buying into Edmonton right now?
Yeah, I mean, you always need enough of an edge to kind of counteract that theoretical hold, but I would buy on the Oilers before any of the other teams at the top right now. I think that this team, by odds makers, deserves to be power rated number 1. I think that most odds makers probably do have them power rated number 1. If you look at how they've played, essentially the whole year, even, right? We talked about this in December. They just needed goaltending. But since the start of December, their 60% expected goals rating at even strength is the top of the league by a wide margin. So that's a huge case in favor of them, especially because they've historically had one of the best power plays in the McDavid-Draisaitl era. We saw this last playoffs. It almost dragged them past Vegas when they were not playing at this kind of a level at even strength. So I think the case is there that Edmonton can actually enter the playoffs as the outright favorite, even in what will probably be a tough bracket. I think if you break down what will be probably their 4 series prices, they'd be about minus 140 the first two, and then slightly closer prices in the second ones. So probably right about plus 900 is like the case there of what the actual odds of them winning all their series will be. And then of course they have to get there healthy. I don't really think there's much chance they won't get there unless McDavid or Draisaitl went down. But the point is that I think all that you can say plus 1,000 is probably the best price on the board. And I think it'd probably be very surprising to some to hear that the Oilers are power rated number one. But I think that take really isn't that disputed. You just kind of have to lop off the start of the year when Stuart Skinner was horrific. And then it's kind of more obvious how they deserve to be viewed as the best team right now.
Do you recommend waiting at all until they maybe lose some games, or do you think the value is enough right now that you want to like scoop this up?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I don't want to try and say there's a ton of value, right? Like as I kind of broke down, plus 1,000 is probably pretty close to roughly what you're going to get.
Okay.
But I think it's a worthy play. I think there's a good chance they enter the playoffs around plus 650, plus 700.
Gotcha.
Like, I don't think there's much chance, especially just the way they're blowing teams out of the water and the underlying statistics are so strong. I don't think there's much chance that they lose enough games that this price wavers. And then there is the chance they actually luck into some sort of a more favorable matchup. So, like, especially if maybe, say, Vancouver cooled off down the stretch, I think there's a world where maybe they end up being an even bigger favorite in round one, and then this price really comes down, that sort of thing. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think the main point is that Edmonton is probably going to enter the playoffs power rated number one as long as McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard are healthy. So, yeah, that's kind of my case why. I mean, it's very rare you see a team that's in the wild card staring down potentially 3 tough playoff series with this kind of a price, but that's the reason why, because they really are just playing that much above everyone else right now.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for clarifying that. And by the way, Connor McDavid, who you mentioned, being back healthy certainly helps. This 11-game win streak actually correlates with an 11-game point streak from him. But let's move on to the slate tonight. Specifically, Nick, what are you betting?
I'm going to be betting on the Minnesota Wild to get a big win in Tampa Bay that they really need. And I think this game is really interesting from a handicapping perspective and just from a viewership perspective too, because these teams met on January 4th and the Wild had none of their lineup. Like, their roster was completely decimated. They had a ton of key bodies out of the lineup, arguably the top 3 most important skaters in order. So they were decimated, and the Lightning were minus 130 to win that game. I thought the Lightning deserved to be a bigger favorite based on who was out of the lineup. And now I think we're seeing the flip side of that. I think that the Wild aren't getting enough credit for how bad their play has been based off who was out of the lineup. And now they've got Zuccarello back, they've got Brodin back, they've got Foligno back, and then most importantly, they've got Kaprizov back. So I think that this game could be priced closer to pick'em if the Wild had been playing with all their guys, if they hadn't just come out of this horrible slump. I think that they can bounce back. And yeah, if you look at the way they were performing directly before all these injuries under John Hines, they were winning a ton of hockey games. And that makes me think it's more of a valid excuse that the injuries caused this, because you see a team playing that well, then everyone goes down. Pretty obvious what happened, right? So I think the Wild can bounce back. I think these teams are rated actually quite closely right now, and don't mind the spot at all either.
Tampa Bay, I think a lot of people associate with, being dominant, but currently smack in the middle of a tight Atlantic Conference. Now, for more, make sure you check out our podcast Line Change, which Nick is on all the time. Nick Martin, thank you.
Thanks, Maria.
And in case you're craving college hoops on a dog day, such as this, our expert Mike Calabrese can advise on what to bet. These are the games he's looking at. Washington State at Stanford with the home team favored and garnering the vast majority of bets and money. And UNC Asheville at Winthrop with 78% of the handle coming in on the home team. And Mike Calabrese is here to break down what he's betting and why. So let's start with that Washington State Stanford matchup.
somebody, at least hypothetically, needs to emerge in the Pac-12 into that third and fourth potential bid conversation, because at this point, most of the league is down this year, and Wazoo coming off one of their biggest wins in years, knocking off Arizona. I think this is the right time to continue to buy on them. And really, it just comes down to their work on the glass. Isaac Jones, the Idaho transfer, is coming off back-to-back 20 and 10 double-doubles. He did it against USC on the road. He did it at home against Arizona. And also, critically, freshman Miles Rice has elevated his play at the point. He's averaging 5 assists per game across his last 5 in conference. And now they're up against a Stanford team that's also playing well, but I think this is going to devolve into a bit of a rock fight. These teams are comfortable playing in the 60s, and if that's the case, if there's limited possessions, Wazoo's advantage on the glass and also the turnover margin is going to swing this one. Wazoo barely turns it over 11 times per game. That's top 80 nationally, whereas Stanford doesn't turn anyone over. They force turnovers on just 13.1% of opponents' possessions, which is 312th in the country. So I'm going to go ahead and take the value plus 140 on the Cougs on the road.
Sounds good. And that's tonight at 11 Eastern. Now for a little mid-major spotlight. What's the deal with this UNC Asheville Winthrop game?
So I've been holding my powder here, waiting for a moment to bet Drew Pember, and it's finally here. He's someone who's been the Big South Player of the Year. He's playing at that level once again. In his last 5 games, he's averaging 26 points, 8 boards, 2 blocks. And here comes Winthrop, who's undefeated in Big South play, but you got to dig into their resume a little bit. All 4 of those wins have come against the bottom 4 in the conference. The cumulative record of those opponents in conference play is 4-14. So I think Winthrop is a bit of a paper tiger. And you also want to keep in mind, UNC Asheville has been phenomenal against the closing number in Big South play. Dating back to last year, they've covered 2/3 of their games against the spread. That's the 18th best mark in the country. So I'll take a team that knows how to cover with the best player in their league and take UNC Asheville plus 3.5.
The Big South, what a conference. That game is tonight at 7 Eastern. All right, Mike, thank you so much for the tips.
Thanks for having me, Maria.
Remember, any picks we give out here on the show, like the ones you just heard from Breeze, you can easily reference by following Green Dot Daily in the Action app. We keep track so you don't have to. And that's all for this edition of Green Dot Daily. I'm Maria Marino. Thanks so much for hanging with me, and I'll see you again Friday at 3 Eastern on the Action Network YouTube channel and the Action app.